Hey, what's up guys? My name is Saurav and this is my YouTube channel Data Science Novice. So if you are new to my YouTube channel, please do like and subscribe. Your efforts are massively appreciated. So this is a lecture series on natural language processing and this is the third video in which we are going to talk about tokenization. Although the topic for today is tokenization, but we are going to cover a lots of things like basics of Spacy, parts of speech, named entity recognition and Displacy. So if you haven't installed the Spacy, watch the first video where we have installed the language library that is required for this lecture series. So first we are going to talk about tokenization. So tokenization is essentially splitting a phrase, sentence, paragraph or entire text document into smaller units such as individual words or terms. And each individual word is called token. So for example, if we take a basic example, so suppose we have a sentence like the boy is playing. So in this case, the is a token, like that is also a token, and so on and so forth. So why do we do that? So that these words can be converted into numerical format so that the algorithm can understand this thing. And the method that do the conversion of string to numerical format is known as vectorization, and we will have a dedicated video on this. So now let's understand this thing with an example that is more complicated. So basically we are going to see how actually splitting works or how tokenization tokens the word. So here we have a sentence in double quotes that we are moving to USA. So in the first phase, the word will separate it on the basis of spaces. So here we have we are moving to USA. In the next phase, we separate the prefix. So if any word has anything in front of that, it gets separated. And here we have the example where starting quote and VR is separated. The next phase is grammatically oriented. So we know that VR can be written as V apostrophe RE. And we know that these are two different words. So what happened in this phase, word like these are getting separated. And in the last phase, suffixes are removed. So you can see that USA and then we have and code. So what happened is USA and code is separated. So this is a very simplified example of very complex process. It is just to explain you what is going under the hood. We can use different ways to tokenize the text. In practical section, we will first use Python inbuilt function that is a split method. Then we will use regular expression which we talked in our second video. And finally, we will use two libraries for tokenization. Next, we are going to talk about parts of speech or POS tagging. So this topic is something really important when we are building language translator or doing some kind of linguistic study. So we will not be going into depth of this topic because this is not going to be any useful for us as of now. So it is a process of making up a word in a corpus to corresponding parts of speech based on its context and definition. So to make it clear, let's take an example. So first example is Google is a tech industry or tech company. So in this case, what is Google? Google is a noun. So when we do POS tagging, in that case, it will tell us Google is a noun here. On the other hand, if I say, let me Google the answer. So in this context, the tag for the Google is going to be verb because here Google referring to the search something on internet. So now you can see here that how important it is for language translation. Like it is able to tell that Google here is something else and Google here is something else. So as of now, we are not going to talk much about this, but in future, if we do some kind of translation or let's say conversion, we will surely touch upon this topic. Similarly, we have name entity recognition. Here we try to recognize the name or entity in a given text. And the purpose could be text analytics. So for example, if you have a dataset having fake news and true news, you might want to know which category of news uses name entity a lot. In that case, NER going to be very helpful. And it also helps in answering questions like which product is mentioned in the article, which company is mentioned, and so on and so forth. So that's all for the theory part. Let's jump to the Jupyter notebook and try to implement all these things. So first we are going to learn some basic operation of Spacy. So let's import the Spacy, and for that we just have to call import Spacy. Next we have to load the language model that we installed earlier. And to do that we just have to call spacy.load, and in that we have to pass the model. So in this case we have installed English model, and for that we have to call encore web sm. Sm stand for small version. So we have installed small version of the English language, and there are medium version, large version. Depending upon the choice or the work you have, you can use either of them. Next, we need the text for the testing the functionality of Spacey, and for that I'm going to take one or two lines from the article that I read on Tesla. So here we have our text data, and next thing we have to do is to load this text into our language model. Initially it might look complicated because first we are importing the library, then we are loading the language model, and inside that language model we are uploading our text. So this is quite a tedious process, and this is something we have to do for every text we are going to use. Initially you will be having some problem, but as the course progress you will get used to this kind of syntax. So let's create a doc variable, and then we are going to call our NLP, and inside that we are going to pass the text. And as we load the document, Spacey does all the heavy lifting for us, like it has already tokenized the words. We just have to access them. And to do that, we just have to run a for loop. So for token in doc, then we use print function, and inside that we pass token. And to grab the actual token, we just have to call the text attribute. So here we have each individual word, and all the heavy lifting is done by Spacey. So here you can see that the comma is also considered as a token. And notice that Spacey is smart enough to know that US is a single entity. And like this, Spacey is really smart enough to understand all these things, that this US is something, and there are many things that we are going to explore. And for that, I'm going to use another text document. So here we have the text, and we are going to repeat the same procedure. First, we have to load this text into the language model, and then we are going to run a for loop to grab all the tokens. So here we have tokenized words, and notice that we have COVID in our document. As of now, it is like this. But what if we make change in the document and I write it as like COVID-19? And let's see what Spacey does. So here we can see that Spacey is smart enough to identify that it is a single entity. It didn't separate it hyphen and 19. It considered the whole COVID-19 as a single token. So like this, Spacey is really smart enough to do all sorts of things for us. Next, let me show you how we can do the POS tagging that we talked in the lecture part. So first, let me add a tab so that things don't get messed up. Next, we just have to call the POS underscore attribute. Okay, so we are getting an error. Oops, let me correct it. So now here you can see that Spacey is able to tag Tesla as a pronoun, COVID as a noun. Then we have all sorts of part of speech like punctuation, numerics, adjectives, and all sorts of things. So this is really helpful when we are doing some kind of translation, or to be more precise, language translation. Next, we are going to see another functionality of Spacey, that its ability to segment our large text into sentences. So for that, I'm going to copy paste a small text about me. Then again, we have to load this text into language model. And to grab all the sentences, we just have to run a for loop like we did earlier. So for send in doc.sends, then we have to call the print function, and inside that we just have to pass our send. And now here you can see that Spacey has break down the whole text into 3 sentences. And if you're wondering how it happened, so this happened on the basis of punctuation rule, that is sentence end with full stop. And also we can test for a particular word in a document that whether it is end or start of a sentence. And to do that we just have to use indexing, and then we have to use is sentence start attribute, and it returns true. That means word at this index is starting of a sentence. And if I change the index to 5, now you can see that it returns false. And like that, we have many functionality that Spacey provides us. And that is something we are going to explore more in upcoming sessions. Now let's talk about the main topic of this video, that is tokenization. So now we are going to see different ways to tokenize a text. So let me mark down this cell. So let's import the regular expression library first, because we are going to use this library as well. So next we are going to copy paste the same text. Let's do one thing. I'm going to change this text. We are going to use a different text to show you what can be the problem with this split function and all that thing. So let me change this text. So let me do the promotion for my new playlist. So my name is Saurav Prasad, and I'm happy to share my new playlist. So just make sure to subscribe to my channel. So now we are going to tokenize this text using Python inbuilt function, that is a split method. So text.split, and it takes argument, that is on what basis we want to split the text. So in this case we are going to split on the basis of space, and here you can see the text has been tokenized. So let me copy paste this code again, and if I pass dot, you can see that it has converted the whole text into sentences. And now let me add few things in my code. Let's add at the rates, and we are going to see how it performs when we pass the at the rate. And now here, instead of space, we are going to pass at the rate. Okay, let's run this cell. And okay, so here we are seeing something else. Okay, so we have to run this cell again, and then we have to run the next cell. And now you can see that what has happened. So it has tokenized the text on the basis of this at the rate. And one thing you will notice that it does not show us at the rate at all. So the problem with this is it does not generalize well, and the argument itself does not get tokenized, like in case of dot or at the rate. So that's why we do not use this split method for tokenization, because that's not fruitful for us. Next, we are going to use regular expression for the tokenization, and for that we have to define a pattern. So I'm going to copy paste it directly, and if you don't get this, watch my previous video on regular expression where I have explained everything. Next, we are going to use find iter method, and we are going to loop over it. So for match in re.find iter, and then we have to pass the pattern and the text. And this is something again I have talked about in my previous video. And if you don't get it, just watch it. You will be able to understand what is happening. Next, we have to call the match.group method to get all the tokens. So here you can see that it has tokenized each element in the text, and you can see that it also consider full stop as a token. So this is a good thing, but the problem with this kind of pattern is that it is very complex to write, or it is very hard to understand if you are beginner. And also you need to have a good knowledge on identifier and quantifier, like how to use them, what kind of identifier should be used at this place or that place, like these kind of things. Next, we are going to use NLTK library to tokenize the text. And for that, we have to import the word tokenize from the NLTK library. And we will see that with these library, we don't have to do much. All the heavy lifting will be done by them. Next, we call the word tokenizer, and inside that, we just have to pass the text. And now here you can see that it has been tokenized. So you see, using these library, everything gets easy, else we have to do all the heavy lifting that we saw in the previous methods, like in split method, and then we saw the same thing in regular expression library. Next, we are going to use Displacy for tokenization. Although we have already done this thing, so feel free to skip this thing. We are going to explore more, but that is not much important. We are just going to see how smart Spacey is. So I'm going to copy paste the same text, and once we have the text, next thing is that we have to load this text into the English model. And in order to get the tokens, we just have to run a for loop, and on that we just have to call a text attribute. And here we have the text converted into tokens, and this is something not new to us. And now if we change the COVID to COVID-19 and rerun the cell, we will see that COVID-19 as a token, which shows that Spacey is really smart enough to understand these things. Now let's explore more on this. And this time I'm going to tokenize a text that contains my website URL and email address. And let's see how Spacey tokenized that text. So now you see that Spacey is able to understand that this is a Gmail address and it should be tokenized as a whole, which is really an amazing thing. And not only that, it is able to understand that there is a website URL. And guys, this is my website where I write about machine learning and all that thing. So feel free to visit it. Now let's change the text again. And this time we are going to deal with the text that involves monetary value and distance in kilometer. And we will see that how Spacey behave in this case. So next we have to run a for loop. So we are going to copy paste this line of code. And now here we see that Spacey is able to understand that dollar should be a separate token and the numerical value should be a separate token. And this is something we can see with the 100 kilometer as well, which is an amazing thing. Another thing that I want to talk about is that we can use length method to know the number of token. We just have to call the length method, and inside that we just have to pass this variable. And now you can see that we have only 8 tokens. And to grab individual token, we can always use indexing method. But one thing that we can't do is the assignment of a new word or a token. Suppose I want to insert my name in the existing document. That is something I cannot do, and it will start throwing error. So here you can see that it is saying object does not support item assignment. So there are many things that Spacy is able to do and understand without being told. And this is something we are going to explore more in upcoming sessions. Next, I want to talk about name entity recognition. That is, Spacy is able to understand that a particular company name or a particular country name. And for that, we are going to use a simple text. That is, Apple is going to build a $10 million new manufacturing unit in India. And next, we have to load this text into the language model, which is something we have been doing. Next, we are going to run a for loop just like the way we did in tokenization. So for ent in doc.ents, and then we use print statement, and inside that we print our entity. And let me make it more representable by adding some arrows. Then we call the label underscore attribute of ent to get what kind of ent it is or entity it is. So here we see that it is able to recognize that Apple here is ORG, that is organization, and 10 million is money, and India is GP, that stand for geopolitical entity. Now you might be wondering that how I know that GP is geopolitical entity or ORG is organization. Well, this is something I read in the documentation, and well, there is another feature of Spacy that explain all these things. So let's copy paste this line of code, and I'm going to add a new print statement. And inside that, I'm going to call spacy.explain, and inside that we have to pass the entity label. And next we print a new line so it does not get messed up. So here we see that basically it gives the definition or explain that what type of entity it is. Like in case of Apple, it is company, agency, or institution, etc. etc. Similarly, in case of $10 million, it's a monetary value including unit. And in case of India, it is a country. Next, we are going to plot the text, and for that, we are going to use Displacy that is provided by Spacy. Note that we can display the graph in Jupyter Notebook as well as on server. And to use the server functionality, we have to turn off the firewall of the computer. So we are not going to do that. We will plot all the graphs inside the Jupyter Notebook. So from Spacy, we import Displacy. Next, we call the Displacy, and on that, we call the render function. And it takes few parameters. So the first parameter we have to pass is the text itself. Then we pass the style, and in this case I'm going to use DEP, that stands for dependency. And since we want to plot these graphs inside the Jupyter notebook, we set Jupyter equals to true. So here we see a graph that is more of a syntactical dependency graph. So here we see that the relation of word with the other word, like apple is a pronoun and going as a verb is used for apple. And this is something we like to do when we are studying about new language. Like even in high school, we used to learn these kind of structure since we were learning about English at that time. So this is really a handy feature when we are exploring new languages. Next, I want to talk about the configuration of this graph. So we can configure this graph according to our need. We just have to pass a parameter that is option, and it takes dictionary as an input. So as of now, we are going to change the size of the graph by just simply passing the distance. And here you can see that the graph is smaller now. And like that, there are many things we can do by simply looking at the documentation of the Displacy. So I'm going to copy paste the few codes from there just to show you how much flexibility we have with these graphs. So once we have options set according to our need, we just have to pass it inside the options. So let's copy paste this code again, and in this time we are going to just pass the option. So let's delete this distance 90 because now we have our options which is configured according to our need. And now here you can see that we have few things changed, like background is sky blue, the graph is look compact, and the font is changed, the text is white. So like that we can do many things, and don't worry, you do not need to memorize this thing because it's already available inside the document. And so feel free to explore this thing more. Next, we are going to plot different kind of graph, and for that we are going to copy paste the same code, and we just have to make few changes. So first thing, we have to remove these options, and next thing that we have to change is style. So earlier it was dependency type, now it is going to be ENT type. So here we see that Apple is highlighted with blue along with its label, and so is the case with money and India. So it was able to identify the entities inside the text, and according to that it changes the color of those entities. And just like we configured the previous graph, we can do the same with this. And the code is going to be self-explanatory, so I'm going to copy paste the code, and we will see that in this case we can play around a lot with the options. So next we just have to pass the options. And now here we see that Apple is colored like this, which is amazing. And like that we can also change the color for other as well. So I'm going to copy the code where I have already written something very intuitive. So in this code, what I'm doing, I'm defining color for each entity. So like organization, money, and then GPE. So let's see how it works. Next, we are going to use an article to understand that how this can be useful. Like if we have a document and we only want to see which countries are talked about in that article, we can use the Displacy to mark those countries so that we don't have to look line by line to see what countries are being talked. So here we have a small part of an article. Next, we have to load this text into the language model like we used to do for all the text. Now let's call the Displacy, and then we have to pass the usual parameter that we saw in the previous examples. And now here we see that all the countries mentioned in the article is highlighted with the orange color. So like that, Spacey and Displacy can make our task much easier. So that's all for this video. So if you are new to the channel, please do like and subscribe and press the bell icon for the future updates. So see you in the next video. Till then, bye, stay safe, wear mask.